Begin by wishing everyone good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is for you. I hope you are all doing well. And I would like to thank you all for joining us as we, hang on a second. Oh, hang on a here. Internet. Excuse me for a moment. Technical problems. Just having just let you all have difficulty. We have networks in the is not showing my computer, so just bear with me for a moment. Okay. Now I'm back. I hope you can all hear me now. Hang on a second. So, too many things. I'm I'm not so good at doing Zoom yet, and there are too many things that I'm trying to do. So give me a second to get other things ready on my computer. Doing one thing makes other things harder. Okay. All right. Now I should be set, I think. So thank you for bearing with me during my little tactical problem there. At any rate, just to, and I think a few people have shown up in the few, when I was fussing about with my computer. Welcoming you all. Thank you for this teaching. The very happy to speak with you. Other thing that I would like to quote Chinese people who are interested and interested in hearing the teachings, and so many of them today have so for you Chinese speakers,
Khenpo, you're coming in and out. We can't hear you very well.
you have to do a little. Can't hear me well. Internet, it's still unstable. Looks like frozen. Session. Oh, okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try this. Can you hear me now? Is everyone there?
Yes, we can.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yep.
Okay, I was trying to do something too complicated with my computer, and I see that it just wasn't working. So I'll have to do things a little bit simpler.
Okay.
Okay. So I'd like to pick up basically, I'm going to be speaking in English today, and I'm very happy to say that we can have Chinese translation. So if you'd like to listen to the Chinese translation, there is an interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can click that to get the Chinese translation. So we're all Dharma brothers and sisters, so to be able to all share this together is, I think, a good opportunity. Now, there are some people who might not have understood my explanation of how to get the Zoom, how to get the interpretation on Zoom. So I'd like to ask our translator, Jeff, to explain it for everyone in Chinese so that people can understand. So is Jeff here, or? I don't hear Jeff explaining it. Too many technical problems this morning. It's so easy when you just sit down in a room and speak to people. Well, we will have to deal with the translation later. I hope that everyone who's listening on Chinese can find the channel. So I'm in particular really happy that we can start speaking about this text, The Way of the Bodhisattva. It's a text that I'm very fond of. And from the first time I read it, when I was a new Buddhist over 20 years ago, it was really inspiring. And it was the first text I studied when I entered the Shedra in Namo Buddha in 2002. And so in years since, I've had teachings on it from Khenchen Trangpa Rinpoche several times. A few chapters here or there. He taught it to the entire Sangha of monks and nuns at Namo Buddha over 3 years. And then I've spent many years working with it daily as I worked on my translation. So it's, I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity to teach it now. So last year, Rinpoche taught the Diligence chapter at the annual Vajradhar seminar in, what do we say, in Varanasi. So it was annual until the pandemic hit, and hopefully we can have them again. At any rate, so what I've done to prepare for this teaching is I've listened to the teachings that Rinpoche gave, and I'm going to use what Rinpoche taught as the basis for my teachings. For a couple of reasons. The first is that, of course, Rinpoche's teachings were wonderful, and they're, they're good instructions that we can all profit from. And the second reason, that's the main reason, but the second reason is that it's always good as a teacher to base your teachings. When you're teaching the Dharma, that's a very heavy responsibility, actually. And so when you take a source such as Rinpoche's teachings as the basis, it gives it a little bit more weight. I'm part of a tradition here. At any rate, so we'll be using those teachings. But first, as Rinpoche always does, we'll begin by reciting the Vajradhar lineage prayer. So as Rinpoche always says, please recite this prayer with faith and devotion for the root and lineage lamas. Now, my clever way of getting the, what do we say? I have to do something clever here, or less than clever. Okay. I want to get that's the wrong text. Oh, where did it go? Here we go. So I've got to start sharing the screen. This is so complicated. It's much easier when you're just all in one room. Okay. Okay, so here we are. So we'll recite the Vajradhar lineage prayer. We'll recite it in Tibetan so that everyone can join along. So please join me in reciting with great faith and devotion. O doje chanjen te lo naro tam marba mila chuje kambo ba du som sheja kunjen karma pa che shi chunje zhiba zi nam dam Drita sasun palden roba so sablam chadya chilang anyebe Nyame drogun tabo kajula Sova depso kajula manam Drupadzino nam tarjilo Shenlo gomji sombashin senor kuna chashene patam Tsende de ta chebe gom chena Ye kur shenba me bar jinjilo Mugo gom jigor sombashin Menga tergo chebela mala Jundo sova debe gom chela Jemen mogu chewar jenjilo Yang me gom jing wajir sombashin Kanshar tobe ngovo somate Madre gar jobe gomchela Gomjalo tan jalwar jinjilo Nam do ngo chukur sombashin Jiyamayin jiryang charvala Mangaro charve gomchela Cordeir me tobar jinjilo Kewa gundo yang dalamatam Rame chuje palalon juchim Sadalam jiyunderazonim Dorje change gompanyor tosho Dorje change gompanyor tosho Me chijinji porane dezanje kujingon Razang uzun chatunze Zawe lame shabdu gujatsa From the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas at 3 times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious, exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now think to yourselves that we must do whatever we can to liberate ourselves and all other sentient beings from suffering. There are many things we could do to help beings in the short term, such as give them food and clothing, safety, protection from fear, protection from injustice. But anything we do in the short term is only going to bring temporary help. And eventually the people we give such temporary help will experience sickness and aging, that is, unless they die young, and death. So none of the temporary help we can give them will help them ultimately. So the only way we can help them ultimately, the only lasting benefit we can give them is to bring them to Buddhahood ultimately. That is the only state that is permanently free of suffering. But in order to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood, we have to achieve Buddhahood ourselves first. And in order to achieve Buddhahood, we need to listen, contemplate, and meditate. So think to yourselves that you're now listening to the Dharma for that reason, and listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. So the Dharma that you are listening to is The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. So the 10 chapters of The Way of the Bodhisattva, this weekend we will be going through the 7th chapter, Diligence. So here you're probably wondering, why? You're thinking to yourself, okay, Khenpo David just translated the book. It's just been published. Maybe you've got your copy already. You're wondering, why is he starting with the 7th chapter? Why don't we start with the 1st chapter? Wouldn't that be logical? Well, yes, but with the first 6 chapters, actually this teaching is, the way this weekend came about is, this is a continuation of teachings I've been giving at Vajradhar Portland in Portland, Maine for the last several years. I think we started in 2016. So I've been visiting Portland every year where there hasn't been some sort of a, disaster that's prevented me from going for over a decade now. And so in 2016, we started this series on the way of the Bodhisattva. And so the first year I taught the first 2 or 3 chapters, and then we've been doing a chapter a year. In 2019, we went through the 6th chapter, which means that we got to the 7th chapter. And then there was a pandemic. So in 2020 with the pandemic, I wasn't able to go anywhere. Or I could have gone somewhere, but I chose not to, really. I ended up here at Trangu Monastery in Canada, and it's really a very good place to be, and people are treating me very well. So I have not gone further than maybe 10 miles or 20 kilometers from this monastery since I got here last March. There were months when I didn't even get in a car. So I'm very happy to have had this opportunity not to contribute to global warming by taking airplane travel, but it means that I haven't been able to continue the teachings in Portland, Maine. So when we spoke about doing the teachings in Portland, Maine, we decided that this weekend would be a good weekend. My book was coming out the week before, so this would be a good weekend to do it. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't conflict with any program here in Vancouver. So I spoke with Lama Pema, and he suggested that we open it up to a wider audience. First, we thought about the students, advertising it for students from Trangu Monastery, Canada, but then it also seemed like, well, we can just, we're also hoping to have more cooperation between the various Trangu Dharma groups all over North America. And, if anyone else wants to join, we are happy to have anyone join. So here, and with Zoom, you can do it everywhere. It's not quite the same as if you do it on your, if you do it regularly, with people actually attending, but still it's better than nothing. So for that reason, because this teaching is a continuation of teachings that I was giving in Portland, we are picking up from where we left off with the Portland group, which means that today we begin with the 7th chapter. Now, of course, the way of the Bodhisattva on its own is like a complete text. And it's good to study the complete text. But one of the nice things about it is that there are, especially the chapters in the middle, each chapter can make a nice kind of complete teaching on its own. So just because even though we're only going through one chapter this weekend, you don't have to feel like disappointed that you aren't getting the whole teaching, because actually each one teaches a different aspect. Here, a different transcendence or paramita. And so we can have kind of a good, complete teaching in a weekend. Besides, the text is long enough that we can't go through the whole thing in just 4 sessions, unless we did just incredibly roughly, right? There's just too much. 935 verses or something like that. And so also this teaching is the first teaching where my own newly published translation is actually published. Over the past few years, when I've taught it in various places, I've used drafts of my translations, but this is the first time that we're using the actual translation. And so you're probably wondering why I would bother to retranslate this book, because there's so many translations, so many English translations of it already. There are probably 8, 9 English translations already. And so why do we need another? So I thought I'd begin this weekend just by going over that briefly. I mean, I've already taken enough time on technical difficulties. I can't waste too much time on this. But the basic reason is that when over the years, when I've been either teaching chapters or when I've been translating for Trungpa Rinpoche teaching various chapters, I would use existing translations. And on the one hand, that's fine, because the published existing translations are generally pretty good. Some have different strengths or weaknesses. They're generally pretty good. But as I worked with them, I found they had a very different feel. That's the main thing. I mean, there are always some differences in interpretation. Some of that comes down to who you're taking as your source for the explanation. Some of it comes to just reading the text differently. So I'm not going to say that one is better than the other in terms of meaning, because people can probably look at this new translation of mine and say that there are problems, that this is not right, that's not right. So it's that I mean, there are some issues of that, of course, but the main thing is the style. Because the Tibetan itself is really, it's a very direct, very simple, it's in verse, and it's easy to remember. There's a rhythm that helps you to remember it. So the Tibetan is a translation. The original Sanskrit was also in verse. And that also has its rhythm and cadence. I mean, I can read Sanskrit, I kind of blunder my way through Sanskrit, but you can listen to recordings of the Sanskrit on the internet. There's a website that has the recordings of the Sanskrit. So if you want to listen to it, you can. You get a feeling for it. But the existing English translations just don't have that feel. And so when I was teaching it, I always felt like something was lacking. So after I'd taught the 4th chapter in Hong Kong, I was thinking about this, and after I finished the 4th chapter on a Monday night in Hong Kong, and on Tuesday I flew back to Nepal, and I had my book with me. And as I was on the flight, I was like starting to translate from the 5th chapter and pencil in the margins on that book. So I actually drafted drafted my translation almost entirely by pencil in the margins of my book, and then reworked it from there. And it took me a few years to go through the translation, doing a few chapters, doing a chapter here or there, depending on what I needed for teachings, when I needed them. So I didn't start at the beginning and go straight to the end. I started with the 5th chapter, and then I don't remember what I did next, but it was not straight through. And then I'd go through an editing. So it basically took the better part of, not the better part, it was something that I worked on off and on for several years. But at the same time as I did that, I realized that just having the translation on its own wouldn't be so easy for many readers, particularly new readers, because Shantideva lived 1400 years ago. He knew Buddhist scriptures well, and he assumed that his audience had the same level of knowledge. So there are a lot of terms, a lot of stories, a lot of ideas that a new reader or a new beginning Buddhist, or even someone who has been practicing Buddhism for a while, but who hasn't done extensive study, just might not know. Also, he puts a lot of allusions to sutras or to Buddhist stories. And it helps to understand the verses if you know the story behind them. The story makes the meaning kind of stick in your mind, right? So I've tried to put a few of those stories and to give explanations of words that people might know. And I based the commentary on the one by the 16th century Karma Kagyu master Pao Tsula Trengma. His commentary is very long. It's 2 volumes. But he gives little summaries, very short summaries of each verse, which I used as the basis for that commentary, and adding some points from teachings I'd received or explanations of points that people had asked me about over the years. So that's the commentary. But for me, the commentary is not the main thing. The main thing is the translation. My commentary is really just for people in this day and age. If it's helpful for people, fine. If it's not, fine. It's the translation that I really care about and that I hope can last for a long time, or that can be the basis for someone else who has more talent to revise and improve. So when we're doing a translation like this, as I said, the original is in verse. And one of the things about translating in verse and trying to match the feel of the original is that so much of the meaning of a text comes through not in the literal words, but in how the words are said, in the style and in the feeling that they convey. And so my hope is that this translation can convey that feeling or replicate that feeling in English. So you get the rhythm, you use the techniques of using meter and rhythm to convey the meaning in words that make you move your ears and your tongue in addition to just your eyes. If it's prose, you're just going to look and read it like that. If it's verse, if you read it aloud, there's a certain feeling to it. So either it works or it sounds like maudlin 19th century amateur prose. You all can judge which it ends up sounding like. If I pulled it off, it makes it easy to remember. If I didn't pull it off, then it's probably going to be easy to remember for a different reason. So I hope it is helpful. But it also helped me as a translator because it helped me, when you're translating in verse, you don't have a lot of room to add extra. You have to really get down to the meaning, the point of that. So that's the reason for the translation. Now, the other thing, you might be thinking, well, okay, so Khenpo David has published his new translation, it's come out, and now he's doing his virtual book tour to get us to buy books. Actually, I am not taking any royalties on this book. All of the royalties of this book are going to the Himalayan Children's Fund to support Trungpa Rinpoche's monks and nuns and school children. So I'm not getting anything. Indirectly, I benefit because all of the donations to Trungpa Monastery end up indirectly benefiting me, because whether it's Trungpa Monastery Canada or Trungpa Monastery in Namabuddha or Varanasi, that's where I get my, my food and the roof over my head. So it does benefit me indirectly, but I'm not actually getting the money. Because if I got the money, I'd probably wait too long before I gave it away. I'm a New Englander. We count our pennies, so it's like, I don't want to deal with that. So it's better to just not let the money come to my way to begin with. So that's the kind of introduction about this weekend. And then we have to we're starting with the diligence chapter. And as I said, it is a complete teaching in its own, but it's also a good idea to kind of take a step back and have an overview of the entire text so that people who are new to the text can understand where it fits in, where we are. And for those of you who are more familiar with the text, it'll be a reminder for you of how the text works. So and also, frankly, when Trungpa Rinpoche taught this text in Varanasi last year, he began with such an overview of the whole text. So since I'm basing what I'm saying on Rinpoche's teachings, I'm just mimicking him here. So as Rinpoche explained in Varanasi, the Way of the Bodhisattva, it's really one of the most important texts in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It's necessary for a practice, it's beneficial, and it's easy to study and practice, easy to integrate into your practice. So in the Tibetan tradition, when you first begin your studies, you often begin with this text, The Way of the Bodhisattva, because it helps you set your motivation which makes the big difference for your studies. So like when Rinpoche began his studies at the age of 15 by Western counting, it was 16 by Tibetan counting. So it was the first text that he studied too. So the reason why it is studied first is because it helps us to rouse bodhicitta and then to maintain it and increase it. So the first thing we have to talk about is, what is bodhicitta? On a basic level, bodhicitta is like a good heart, a good motivation, a good attitude, an altruistic motivation of loving kindness and compassion for all sentient beings without any bias or favoritism. But this motivation has two facets. There are two aspects that have to be there. There's compassion, and there's also prajna. So prajna means the ability to know what is dharma, what is not dharma, what is right, what is not right, what will work, what will not work. So the aspect of compassion is that bodhicitta is focused on all sentient beings with the wish to free them all from suffering, the suffering of samsara. So that's the aspect of compassion. But it also has the aspect of prajna, which means the ability to distinguish what is dharma and what is not. So here in the context of bodhicitta, the prajna means recognizing what is actually going to truly benefit sentient beings, is bringing them to Buddhahood. So there are basically these two aspects to prajna. There's the unbiased compassion for all sentient beings, none excepted, and the prajna that recognizes that the only way to truly help them is to bring them all to Buddhahood. So when we talk about bodhicitta, particularly in the West and in Western Dharma teachings, we often focus on the feelings, what it feels like to have bodhicitta. I remember when I was first learning Buddhism 24 years ago or so, I went to Dharma study group, and we'd have many conversations about bodhicitta, but the texts that we studied and the conversation in the study group was almost always, what does it feel like to have bodhicitta? And so, my feeling that after all of these discussions about what it felt like to have bodhicitta is that it was like some sort of extra special, altruistic, warm and fuzzy feeling, but on steroids. That's what I kind of felt that bodhicitta actually was. But as I've studied and seen, I've actually seen that's not what it is. The feelings that you experience when you have bodhicitta are not what is important. It may feel like different things. It might feel like a broken heart. It might feel joyous. It might just be neutral. That's not how it feels is not what is important. What is important is the motivation of wanting to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood. That's what that's what is important. So it can feel in any different way. So if anyone asks you what bodhicitta is, the answer is it's the wish to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood that comes from compassion. So you have the compassion for all sentient beings of wanting to truly free them from suffering. That is the cause, and that's the compassion aspect. Then you realize that the only way to do that is to bring them to Buddhahood. That is the aspect of prajna. And that means in order to bring them to Buddhahood, you have to reach that first. So then you take the strong resolve to do just that, to achieve Buddhahood. So this type of attitude does not come automatically for most people. You have to train in it, and you can't train in it once. You can't train in it for just 5 minutes. You have to train in it continually. And this isn't a problem, really, actually. It's just the way we are. It's not like most people suddenly think, I need to become a Buddha. A few people, like maybe 1 or 2 in 10 billion might think that, but not many at all. So our habituation as ordinary beings is so strong that we don't see Buddhahood as an option, or we don't even realize that there could be an option. If you know about Buddhas, you don't think you could become one. If you don't know about Buddhas, there's no way you're going to think about becoming them. And so we just don't see it as an option for ourselves. But there are ways to develop bodhicitta. It's not a hopeless situation. So there's a very popular verse among Tibetans that kind of summarizes what we need to do with bodhicitta. And so to translate the verse, it reads, "May bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, not weakening in those who have. May it go ever stronger and stronger." So there are 4 lines. So may bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, not weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. So there are 4 lines, and there are 3 things that we are aspiring for. First, it is an aspiration to rouse bodhicitta. That is, may it arise in those who have not roused it. The second is the aspiration for it not to weaken, not weakening in those who have. And the third is for it to grow stronger and stronger. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. So this is a kind of a summary of how we need to rouse bodhicitta, and it's also a summary of the entire way of the bodhisattva. So the way of the bodhisattva then has these kind of 3 main parts: how to rouse bodhicitta, how to maintain it without it weakening, and how to make it grow stronger. And the 10 chapters can be grouped in these 3 different sections. So the first 3 chapters of the text are about how to rouse bodhicitta. To rouse bodhicitta, first you have to inspire yourself. And the way you do to do that is to think about the great benefits bodhicitta will bring. As Rinpoche said in Varanasi last winter, when you know and think about its benefits, bodhicitta naturally arises. So one of the benefits of bodhicitta is that it protects us from suffering. Generally, our suffering comes from the ripening of karma, primarily from the misdeeds we have committed in this and in previous lifetimes. Sometimes you read in newspapers and such today about, in the United States, people talk about like the zip code lottery. If you're born in certain zip codes, then you're likely to have a healthy life. If you're born in certain zip codes, you're likely to have an unhealthy life. It's similar probably here in Canada, except that we'd call them postal codes. It doesn't matter. If you're born in certain locations, then that really determines an awful lot about your life. And then also the other karma that happens. So we all have a lot of karma from the past, and we might worry about the suffering that it's going to bring. But if we rouse bodhicitta, it will purify those misdeeds. Just as the inferno, traditionally taught to destroy the end of the world at the end of an eon, destroys the earth and everything on it. It's like Shantideva says in the first chapter, like the inferno at an age's end, it burns up great misdeeds in a single instant. So when you have bodhicitta, it will purify you. And once your misdeeds have been purified by bodhicitta, that means essentially once the negative imprints in our consciousness have been erased by the tremendous positive impact of bodhicitta, then they will not be able to create any suffering for us. So it's a way, rousing bodhicitta is a way for us to purify ourselves of bad karma and the afflictions that cause it. That's the first benefit. And we also, in order to rouse bodhicitta, we need to have a lot of virtue. Basically, we have to have we have to do a lot of actions, virtuous actions with our body, speech, and mind to create virtuous habits. But ordinary virtues have a limited benefit. They can only give one ripened result. Bodhicitta, though, brings unlimited benefits. It's like the heaven tree in the realm of the gods of the 33. This tree, you go to the tree, the gods go to the tree and they say, may I please have a pear? It gives them a pear. May I have delicious amrita nectar? It gives them amrita nectar. Whatever they want, it gives them to them. So bodhicitta is like this. As Shantideva says, all other virtues, like banana trees, are spent once they have produced a result. The tree of bodhicitta constantly bears fruit, thus thriving inexhaustibly. So that's what's taught in the first chapter, the benefits of bodhicitta as a way to inspire ourselves to rouse it. So this chapter is really important. But we also have to recognize our fortune, because the way of the Bodhisattva is available in so many languages. There are English and Chinese translations, as well as translations into French, German, and Spanish, and probably several other languages that I don't know about. So as Rinpoche said last winter when he taught this, it's important for us to get a copy of the Way of the Bodhicitta, to read it, or even read it aloud and to think about it, because it will inspire us to rouse bodhicitta. So the first chapter in particular does that, but the other chapters are also very inspiring. So then the next two chapters teach us about about how to, once you've been inspired to rouse bodhicitta, then you need to actually take the Bodhisattva vow. And so that's what the next couple of chapters do. They teach us how to do that. If you look at them in detail, they teach the process first of going through the preliminaries, then taking the vow, and then rejoicing in the vow. But if you look at it more simply, Rinpoche described it as having two parts: confessing our misdeeds in order to remove any impediments to taking the Bodhisattva vow, which is taught in the second chapter entitled Confession, and then the process of actually taking the vow, which is taught in the third chapter. So I had so many technical problems at the beginning. You all were fine. I had the technical problems at the beginning, so I'm going to have to go a little bit quicker than I had anticipated. So I'll skip forward a little bit. Basically, that's the way that you have to confess your misdeeds to purify them. And then you need to take the Bodhisattva vow. And the way you take the Bodhisattva vow is described in the third chapter. As it says in the third chapter, it reads, "Just as the Sugatas of the past aroused the mind of bodhicitta, just as they followed step by step the training of the bodhisattvas, so too shall I, to benefit wanderers, arouse the mind of bodhicitta. So too shall I follow step by step the bodhisattva's training." So what we mean here in this verse is that first you have to say, if we think about the Buddhas, why are they Buddhas and we're not? The only real difference is that at some point in the past, when they were ordinary beings just like us, they decided they wanted to become Buddhas, and they trained in the path. So there are two parts. There's the first, the wish, I want to become a Buddha. That's what we call aspirational bodhicitta, or aspiring bodhicitta. And then there's engaged bodhicitta, which is actually engaging in the practices that bring you there. So the Buddhas had that wish of the aspiring bodhicitta, and they did the practice, the engaged bodhicitta, and because that, they're Buddhas. We did not in the past. So we are still ordinary sentient beings. So if we now do what they did and have the wish to achieve Buddhahood and then train in it, we ourselves can become Buddhas. If we do that, then eventually we will reach Buddhahood ourselves. So rousing bodhicitta and then taking this vow is the first step on that. So that's the third chapter, and so that's the first three chapters. So at this point, I thought about saying a few things. There's one thing that comes up. I guess I really do need to say this. If you're going to accept that there's bodhicitta, then really the arguments depend on believing that there are past and future lives, and it's hard to get around that. And this is something that's difficult for people who come to bodhicitta, or to come to Buddhism from Western backgrounds. And so you have to really think about it carefully. I'm not going to be dogmatic and say, thou shalt believe in past and future lives. But I'll ask you, please consider. Because when you consider and take an open mind, then it's easier, or then you're giving yourself the possibility. And I think that as you look at the evidence, you'll see for yourselves. If, on the other hand, you just say that there can't be, I wasn't taught that in my science class, there can't be past and future lives, then it's really difficult. And you might think that all you want to do is meditation. All you want to do is Mahamudra or Dzogchen meditation. But even that requires the understanding of past and future lives. It's based on karmic cause and effect. Because if you're thinking about Mahamudra, if you think that the mind and consciousness cease when you die, then you haven't understand what it means in the teachings on Mahamudra and Dzogchen when it says that the nature of mind is unconditioned and not dependent upon anything or spontaneously present. Because if it is not dependent upon anything, then it can't depend on whether you're alive or dead. If your mind ceases at the moment of death, then the nature of the mind also has to cease, and it's therefore dependent upon your being living. So it would not be unconditioned. So this is one thing that our retreat master in Sekar Retreat Center in Nepal talks about. If you take a strict materialist view that the mind ceases at death, and there's no way you can truly realize Mahamudra because you are misunderstanding your view will prevent you from seeing the actual nature of the mind. So even if you're taking high teachings, you cannot divorce them from the fundamental teachings on the nature of samsara, reincarnation, and karma. And similarly with bodhicitta, you have to at least hold the door open to them. You can certainly, without having bodhicitta, without thinking about past and future lives, you can certainly have compassion, but compassion is different than bodhicitta. If you're going to have bodhicitta, then you have to assert that there is samsara, that there is a cycle of suffering that goes from one life to the next. If you don't accept that, then there's no point in having bodhicitta, because why would you bother to become a Buddha to save all sentient beings from the suffering of samsara when they are going to be freed from suffering the moment they die? There's no point, right? So it's necessary to at least consider this. So you have to keep an open mind about this. There's a lot more that could be said about this, but I think I probably need to skip on a little bit and get down to the actual text of the chapter. So, or actually we're not even at the text of the chapter, we're still in the summary of the chapter. So when we get back to the way of the Bodhisattva, so we've got the first 3 chapters describe how to rouse bodhicitta by first inspiring yourself by remembering the benefits. Then you eliminate the impediments by confession. Then you finally take the vow. And then you need to keep the vow, which means you need to do the practice of bodhisattva. The 6 transcendences of generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, dhyana, and prajna. So these are what are taught in the next chapters. But if we look at it in a sort of more general level, if we go back to that verse, may bodhicitta great and precious arise in those who have not roused it. That's the first 3 chapters, right? Arousing bodhicitta. Then you've got the next chapter, not weakening in those who have. That is that's the next 3 chapters that teach how to keep bodhicitta, how to prevent yourself from what do you say? How do you keep from breaking your bodhisattva vow? And then may it grow ever stronger and stronger. So those are the last 4 chapters which speak about that. So we need to think about, once you have roused bodhicitta, it's important to keep the vows. And so that's hard for us as ordinary beings because we naturally forget things because of our own habituation from beginningless time. And so because we have been in samsara from beginningless time, we have all the afflictions, and it's quite possible. So we need the teachings of the next 3 chapters on carefulness, awareness, and patience to help us maintain our bodhicitta. The first thing is that we need to remember it all the time. We need to think to ourselves, bodhicitta is good. I must not let it deteriorate. I must not break my bodhisattva vow. So when you think about that, then you're being careful about it. You're valuing the vow. And so therefore, this is what's taught in the chapter on carefulness. So when we say carefulness, the main point is that you value. If you value something, you are careful of it, and you want to protect it. So we need to be careful of and value our bodhicitta. So valuing bodhicitta and being careful it's the foundation for everything. It's the foundation for all of the other practices of the 6 transcendences. So that's the 4th chapter. Then once we have roused and once we value bodhicitta, then we must make sure never to forget it. We need to remember it. That is to say, we need to have mindfulness. So sometimes we talk about mindfulness as like what you're using in meditation, but here it means remembering. Remembering what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So in a meditation practice, if you're, for instance, doing shamatha meditation on your breath, and it's remembering that you need to be following your breath or counting your breath or whatever. In the context of the vow of the Bodhisattva, mindfulness means remembering what you should do and to keep the vow and what you should not do that would break the vow. So remembering. And remembering that requires that you be aware of what's going on in your mind first. So the 5th chapter teaches that awareness. But when we're mindful and aware, as ordinary sentient beings, we have a big problem, and that is the afflictions. So the afflictions are like greed, delusion, pride, fear, and so forth, envy. For the Bodhisattva, but for us Bodhisattvas, the biggest affliction is hatred and anger. I mean, anger is a difficult problem for a lot of people, everyone in daily lives. And everyone's thinking, what can I do how can I keep myself from losing my stack? How can I keep myself from getting angry and ruining things? So here, the methods are taught that Shantideva's taught is the method of patience. It's like forgiveness, forgiving people who have done you wrong instead of holding a grudge against them or nursing anger. But it also means what you do at the moment someone is doing something that sets you off. When someone insults you or harms you in some way, how do you deal with that? So that's patience. That's what's taught in the 6th chapter. So these 3 chapters on carefulness, awareness, and patience teach us what we need to do to prevent bodhicitta from weakening. But that alone is not enough. We also have to strengthen our bodhicitta, and we need to increase our realization. So to do that, we have to take care of it. You need to nurture it. And the techniques for nurturing bodhicitta are basically to be diligent, to meditate on bodhicitta, to develop prajna, and to make dedications. And so in this way, we need to basically practice relative and ultimate bodhicitta. So that's what the last 4 chapters taught. And in particular, if we're going to meditate on ultimate relative bodhicitta, then we need to be diligent about it. It just doesn't come if you sit there. If you're watching Netflix, are you meditating on bodhicitta? No. If you're enjoying a nice meal, are you meditating on bodhicitta? Possibly, but maybe not, right? So if you aren't diligent, nothing is going to happen. So that's what this 7th chapter, which we're talking about this weekend, teaches, diligence. Then the next 2 chapters teach what we meditate upon. That's relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So the 8th chapter teaches the meditation on relative bodhicitta, and the 9th chapter on prajna teaches the meditations on ultimate bodhicitta. And then the final chapter teaches the 10th, the final chapter, the 10th, teaches the dedications, which are also very important. So that's kind of an overview of the text. It tells us why bodhicitta isn't so important, how to rouse it when we have not yet aroused it, how to keep it from weakening, and how to increase it so that we'll be able to actually do what we really want to do, to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood. So this is why the Way of the Bodhisattva is such an important text, and it's one that we always study over and over again. And this is different than an academic study. It's not like studying economics or chemistry or politics or whatever else you study in college. It's not where you can just read it once and understand it and then move on. You actually have to read it again and again. And the more you read the text, the more you study it, then then the deeper it comes in. You need to take teachings on it. You can, if you really want to study it, you need to read different commentaries and so forth, listen to teachings from different teachers, get different angles, and then you need to contemplate it for yourself. Think about it thoroughly. You need to try to actually put it into practice. So that's an overview of the Way of the Bodhisattva, kind of how the whole text is put together. And the main point of doing that is to give you an idea of where this chapter fits. So now we will actually begin to speak about diligence. And so to speak about diligence, the chapter begins, if I get to the chapter, what do we say? Here we are. So the chapter begins, and now I understand that not everyone necessarily has the book today. So I'm going to share with you this first chapter here, and I'm also putting up the Chinese translation for those who want the text, or who want to see it in Chinese. So the first stanza says, "Thus with patience be diligent. Enlightenment dwells in striving so. There is no motion without wind, no merit without diligence." So here, this is the first stanza is beginning with the first line, "Thus with patience be diligent," is giving us giving us kind of a link between this chapter and the previous chapter. So the preceding chapter teaches the three different types of patience. And with patience, there are three types. The patience of being able to put up with pain and suffering in the path of the Dharma. The second type of patience is the patience of putting up with harm. And the third type of patience is the patience of contemplating the Dharma. So when we're talking about diligence, you have to be able to bear with suffering. So that's the one that is most important now, the patience of being able to bear the hardships of Dharma practice, because Dharma practice is not always easy. There are a few extraordinary individuals who, achieve Buddhahood easily, but most people aren't like that. It takes a lot of work. Even if we think about like the great Kagyu masters, since I'm in the Kagyu tradition, we always use the Karma Kagyu tradition, we use the Karma Kagyu masters. If you think about Marpa and Milarepa, did they just sit back and relax and achieve Buddhahood? No. Marpa, the translator, risked his life to go to India 3 times, and he actually nearly died on more than one occasion. In each of his trips his second trip, there's no story of him nearly perishing, but there are certainly stories of nearly perishing in his first trip and in his last trip. So he risked his life to go there. He crossed the mountains, and just to achieve to gain the Dharma, all for the sake of practicing and studying the Dharma. So they all went through these extreme hardships. Milarepa, there's no need to speak about. I mean, if anyone knows the story of Milarepa, you all know how hard he worked. He spent decades in the mountains with nothing to eat, dedicating himself to Dharma practice. So they went through extreme hardships. And because they went through extreme hardships, they found methods that they then taught and have been passed down to us so that we can achieve realization with less hardship, but not no hardship. You still have to put up with difficulty and put effort into your practice or nothing will come of it. Everyone who's been serious about their meditation practice understands that there are times when it's just hard. It's just not easy when you're trying to practice and study. So you have to keep going and persevere. So that's why you need that first type of patience, the patience of being able to put up with hardship and difficulty in your practice. So we can't immediately expect to be just like the Kagyu masters of the old days and be a child of the mountains, wearing the mist for clothes and accepting the loss in food, friends, and fame. So if you all run off, you hear me talking about diligence and that you need to put up with hardship, and then you think you're going to run off to, I don't know, Mount Katahdin in Maine for all of you, some mountain park and find a cave. If you do that without developing your intelligence, your prajna, your abilities first, then the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to get cold, hungry, and discouraged. And if they have to send in a rescue helicopter for you, they're going to send you a big bill. So that wouldn't do any good. You have to develop your diligence. So you shouldn't expect that you are going to start out by being just like Milarepa. You have to get there. We can only do that if we are diligent. So here in the verse, Shantideva requires, let me get back to, or let's get back to, wait. There we are, the first verse. So as Shantideva says in the verse, there is no motion without wind, no merit without diligence. No motion without wind. So when Rinpoche taught this in Varanasi, he spoke about this in terms of he gave the analogy of like a flame, or like a flag. There's no wind, the flag is just hanging limp. But if there is wind, then the flag will flutter. It'd be really nice, right? So you've got this beautiful flag, your prayer flag's fluttering. Otherwise, they're just hanging, doing nothing. Or there's another way you can look at it. When it says that there is no motion without wind, then what this is talking about is actually in ancient Indian physics, you had the four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. And they all combine to produce particles that then form the various different material things we see. But you shouldn't think about them as being like the pieces of dirt or molecules of H2O or flames and wind that you would feel on your face. Instead, they're like the qualities or energies. So earth is like solidity, water means being liquid, fire is heat, and wind means motion. So if you don't have those, in ancient Indian physics, if you don't have wind, then there's no way something can move. So that's what an ancient kind of interpretation, the ancient physics. That's the technical explanation. And so they gave me the title of Khenpo, so I have to bore you with these technical descriptions. But then the question is, well, what is diligence? So diligence here is, one second. And diligence is a zest for virtue, the first line. Diligence is a zest for virtue. So zest or enthusiasm. When we talk about a zest for virtue, we think, diligence, we ordinarily think of diligence as being working hard. So if you work hard at your job or at music or at sports or whatever you work at, if you work hard, then you're diligent. So someone who is, when we think of someone who is diligent, we consider that to be someone who is willing to work hard and take the care to do things properly. But that's not necessarily what we mean by diligence in the Dharma. Actually, if we think about it in Dharma terms, being diligent at sports, being diligent at the arts, being diligent about business, being diligent about your job, mostly depending upon what your job is actually a form of laziness. The reason why these are laziness is because you're spending your whole time doing worldly work when you could be devoting yourself to Dharma practice. So there's no result that comes from them that you can take to your next life. If you are an artist, you draw beautiful paintings and sculptures and so forth. When you go on to the next world, they don't do you any good. Sports, let's forget about the next life. When you get to be the age of 30, sports don't do a whole, they can still do a little bit of good for you, but what are you going to do? If you're an Olympic athlete when you're in your 20s, at your age of 32, you're washed out and over the hill. In business, you earn some money, you can't take that with you. So that you just use up your precious human life without giving any result you can take with you when you go. So in worldly terms, they're considered diligence, but in Dharma terms, they're laziness. Unless you do them with the motivation of bodhicitta. So actually doing them with the motivation of bodhicitta, if you can do your job with the motivation of bodhicitta, or if you can do sports or arts with the motivation of bodhicitta, more power to you, excellent, but it is not as easy as it sounds like it should be. You have to be certain, because our minds and our habits are very tricky, and you might just be fooling yourself and using the veneer of bodhicitta as an excuse to do something that you just really like doing. If that's what you're doing, that's not really bodhicitta. So you have to be honest with yourself. I'm not saying don't try. I'm saying be honest when you try. If you say to yourself, I'm going to make art for the sake of bodhicitta, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do sports and exercise so that I'll be able to have more, so that I'll be able to have a strong body and be able to practice, fine, if you are really using that and not tricking yourself. Otherwise, you might just, you're just doing something you're attached to. You have to be honest with yourself. So, we were interested in Dharma that we can practice in the context of our daily lives, but if you really want to practice the Dharma, actually you have to look at yourself and see how attached are you to your daily life. You have to look. Is this Dharma something you're doing because it makes this life better or more tolerable? Or are you actually really practicing the Dharma with the motivation of achieving Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings? So are you doing stress reduction, or are you doing bodhicitta? Which are you doing? So for most of us, because we're ordinary sentient beings, the stress reduction and the benefit in this life is going to be high up on that scale. And maybe there's a little bit of the benefit sentient beings. It's understandable. It's not bad. Wanting to benefit ourselves in this lifetime is actually a good motivation. It's not a bad motivation. We feel like something's lacking. We want to fix it. It's not bad, but it is a limited motivation. So we have to try to increase it and strengthen our motivation. That means that we just have to keep working at it over and over again. So anyways, we'll get back to diligence now. And diligence, as we said before, it's not just working hard, especially not at worldly things. It's this, as we said before, diligence is a zest for virtue and trying to be enthusiastic about Dharma practice. And the main thing about diligence, again, the enthusiasm or zest here means something in your mind. It's the willingness and the excitement about doing virtuous things. When you think about doing something virtuous, you get excited. You're excited to do your meditation practice. You're excited to be generous. You're excited to practice discipline. You know the benefits, and because you know the benefits, then you want to do them. When you're excited about something, then you naturally do it. So it's the mind that is most important. If your mind is excited, your body and speech will naturally follow. And then you will just naturally do virtuous actions. So you work with your mind first, and then the actions will follow. It's like if you have a kid, or if you are a kid, or maybe not just a kid, but if someone is totally into the guitar, they really want to practice the guitar. Usually it happens with teenagers, but it can happen with people later in their lives. They're totally into the guitar or whatever. Maybe it's the violin or some other instrument. And if you're really interested into playing the guitar, then you're going to practice. You're going to work hard at it. And naturally they'll spend more time and get better. The root of that is that they're excited and want to do that. The more excited, the more you're going to do it, and the better you'll get. And then the more results you'll get from it. So diligence here means developing that zest for virtue, that zest for Dharma practice. So then the next, so that tells us basically the opening 5 lines, that first stanza, and then the first line of the second stanza tell us what diligence is. Now the rest of the chapter teaches us how do we develop bodhicitta. And so there are 2 main parts. The first part is eliminating the impediments to diligence. And then the second part is the methods for strengthening and increasing diligence. So that's 2 parts. First, eliminating the main impediment to diligence. And the second is strengthening and increasing diligence. So what is the main impediment to diligence? It says, Shantideva describes here. What's contrary to that? To explain its laziness, clinging to the bad, and sloth, and self-disparagement. So what is contrary? What is the opposite of diligence? It's being lazy. And so here, Shantideva is gives us 3 different types of laziness. The first is clinging to bad actions. That's in the end of the 3rd line of the verse. Then sloth, and then self-disparagement. So there are these 3 different types of laziness: clinging to the bad, sloth, and self-disparagement. So of these 3, the first of them is, the first of these 3 is the clinging to bad actions. So what we mean by clinging to bad actions, we're not talking about bad actions like murder and mayhem. Actually here it means like activities that are neutral or slightly negative, such as sports, theater, art, song, dance, business, whatever. So ordinarily, as I mentioned before, we don't think of these as laziness. But when we engage in these activities, we're doing them out of a concern for this life and out of self-interest. And so for a bodhisattva, that is considered a type of laziness. We're using precious time that we could instead be devoting to Dharma practice, whether formal meditation or practice of the post-meditation practice of the transcendences. So that is why they're considered laziness from a Dharma perspective. Of course, as I said before, it depends on your motivation, but don't kid yourself. And you can't automatically think to yourself, I'm going to give up all these bad actions, these neutral or slightly negative actions. You have to work with your mind first. If you enjoy doing art, enjoy doing exercise, I'm not saying stop right now. Thou shalt stop and thou shalt be diligent. No. Work with your mind, develop with your motivation. And that will then lead to either doing these actions with a true motivation of bodhicitta, or it will lead you to realizing that you can spend your time better on something else. You take it a step at a time. So then the second type of meditation, if we go back to the verse, is, the second is, so in the fourth line, it says sloth and self-disparagement. So sloth is what we normally think of with laziness. It's just kind of lying about, being indolent, enjoying it. It's that's all that we mean by sloth, really. And then the third type, self-disparagement, is a very interesting type. It's basically thinking, I can't do it. No way. Excuse me for a moment. You're thinking to yourself, I can't become a Buddha. I can't achieve Buddhahood. I can't go through all the path. So that's self-disparagement. It's disparaging yourself because actually you have the ability to do it. So these are the three types of Buddhism. The three types of diligence. The diligence of clinging to bad actions, the diligence of being of sloth, and the diligence of self-disparagement. The laziness of clinging to bad actions, the laziness of sloth, and the laziness of self-disparagement. Excuse me. So why is it that we get get lazy? The reason why we get lazy is described in the next stanza. As it says here, laziness arises from not wearying of samsaric pain, from craving sleep and savoring the pleasures of being indolent, right? So we've got here three different causes. The first is not wearying of samsaric pain. The second is craving sleep. And the third is savoring the pleasures of being indolent. These three causes of, of being lazy. So with these three, I think the second and third, the craving sleep and savoring the pleasures of being indolent, who does not understand those? Almost everyone, I think most of us have those. We all like to have a good night's sleep. We all like to just lie around and do not much of anything. So those are easy to understand. The first one, not wearying of samsaric pain, means that we aren't taking the suffering of samsara to heart. So it means that we haven't understood the truth of suffering and don't have a genuine wish to achieve liberation. And if you don't have a genuine, heartfelt wish to achieve liberation, then you're more likely to get lazy because it doesn't matter to you. So you don't yearn to practice. You don't have that zest, that enthusiasm for virtue. So there are these three main reasons why we get lazy. Now, when I look at these three reasons, actually, I think that a large part of it is that we just don't understand the truth of suffering. Now, this is my own thought as I look at it. I haven't seen a source for that, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. And this is why I'm telling you that it's just my own interpretation. But I think that the first one, if you're not wearying of samsaric pain, it means that you're not understanding the first type of suffering, the suffering of suffering. You don't appreciate the suffering of this lifetime. You're not appreciating the suffering of the future lifetimes. You're not aware of all that suffering, or you think you can avoid it somehow. So you are not weary of it. The second and the third basically mean the second, what do we say? The second is the craving sleep and savoring the pleasures of being indolent. These basically mean that you not understanding the suffering of change, that you're clinging to things that are pleasant. or to things that are neutral. You're not understanding the suffering of formation. So this is an interpretation I haven't seen in any other commentary. So you have to you have to look at it carefully, examine it. But I think that there is, it seems to me, a reasonable one. You just can't make things up when you're talking about when we're talking about the Dharma. But it's, I think there's some reason that could be said. Anyway, so once we know about what the causes of the laziness are, then we have to think about what are the antidotes. How can we actually eliminate them? And so Shantideva considers the antidotes for the different types of laziness in order. And he first talks about the laziness of sloth, the antidotes for the laziness of sloth. And there are primarily two antidotes: the meditations on death and impermanence, and the meditation on the sufferings of the lower realms. So these are actually two of the four thoughts that turn the minds. What in our Kagyu tradition, we call them the common preliminaries. If you meditate on the common preliminaries well, then that'll really automatically make you diligent. But usually we kind of just rush through the common preliminaries and then we go into the refuge and prostrations. So we don't spend enough time thinking about the four thoughts that turn the mind. And I think that's one reason why a lot of people have difficulty when they get to the four preliminaries of refuge and prostrations and so forth. At any rate, we need to meditate on death and impermanence and on the sufferings of the lower realms to counter our habits of sloth. And Shantideva first talks about the meditations on death and impermanence. So he begins in verse 4 by saying, here we go, stalked by the hunters, the afflictions, you've walked into the trap of birth. Yet do you still not understand you've entered the maw of the Lord of death? So this is reminding us that once we have been born, it is certain that we are going to die. The reason that it is certain we're going to die is because we have been born. Once you have been born, there is no way to avoid death. So in this way, when we look at it, actually, what is the cause of death? It is birth. This is the one thing that if there is birth, there is necessarily death. When like if someone dies, the medical examiner will write down the cause of someone's death, and they'll write like heart attack, asphyxiation, cancer, COVID, whatever they write down. But actually, if you look at it, those are all the secondary conditions. The one thing that you have to have for death, the primary cause for death, is birth. That precedes every single death. So therefore, birth is the main cause of death. And the reason why we keep taking birth is the afflictions. And primarily there are the afflictions, the main reason is that we have the afflictions and primarily attachments and craving. So the afflictions are like hunters, and they're chasing us, driving us into a trap. And once we're caught in that trap, there's no escape. But we don't realize this, and we spend our lives indulging in our afflictions and indulging in our attachments. If we know this and understand it, then we'll be diligent. But in order to really know it in our hearts, we have to contemplate it. And that's not always fun. Meditating on impermanence can be quite depressing, but actually it brings really good results. And Rinpoche always talks about it. Every time Rinpoche gives a teaching, he says the same thing. So I'm going to say it here. He said it in Varanasi teaching about this section last year. So I better say it here if I'm modeling my teachings on Rinpoche's. So in the beginning, remembering death and impermanence inspires us to practice the Dharma. You'll think, I have to do something that'll help me at the time of the death, and that is the Dharma. So the meditating on impermanence inspires you to enter the gate of the Dharma and to begin practicing the Dharma. And then in the middle, impermanence is like the rod or whip that inspires us to be diligent. So rod, you can either have a metal rod or you can have a riding crop. You're riding on the horse and you want to go faster. What do? You take your crop and you whack the horse's flank to make the horse go faster, right? So it helps you, it inspires you to your Dharma practice. And in the end, it is the companion or aid to achieving the result, because by meditating on impermanence, we inspire ourselves to practice the Dharma and be diligent, and then we can achieve the results of Buddhahood that bring great benefit to ourselves and other sentient beings. And even if we don't achieve Buddhahood in this lifetime, it still have other real benefits, because it'll encourage you to do something virtuous in this lifetime. So you think to yourself, oh, I need to do something. So you recite 100 mani mantras, right? Then when you get to the time of death, you can at least think back and say, at least I did a few mantras. I did a few mani mantras. I've done something virtuous. You know, you'll be dying. You'll be going through the death process. Your entire life will flash before your eyes, and you'll think, oh, yes, I meditated on the mani mantras at least once. That was one good thing that I've done among everything else. So this is really important, and you can actually really take comfort in it. So that's basically, once we're born, we're going to die. But sometimes we realize we're going to die at some point, but we haven't really, what do we say? We haven't really taken it to heart. And so, as Shantideva says about this, oh, hang on. Where does it go? Where did my screen sharing go? There we go. Oh, we're still sharing. Have you not seen that your compeers are being killed one after another? Still, even so, you fall asleep, just like a buffalo with a butcher. We think we've got time, and yet actually we don't have as much time as we thought. The reason why we don't have so much time is, you know, we can see everyone around us going, and no one thinks they're going to go. We all know people who have died. I mean, it's not like it was in the past. In the past, death was a very common experience for people. Now it's like something that happens occasionally. You don't hear about it so much. You basically, the older you get, the more people you know who have died. But especially when you're young, you don't know so many people who've died. It didn't used to be like that. But we do still watch people around us dying. We just don't think it's going to happen to us, at least not yet. So we think we can practice the Dharma later. I'll do it when I retire, when I have more time. And so we're giving the Dharma a lower priority than the things of this life. And so Shantideva has a really vivid comparison for this. So he says, still, even so, you fall asleep, just like a buffalo with a butcher. So you've got the buffalo there in the pen at the butcher's place. And they see all of the other buffaloes being led off to get slaughtered one by one. But still, what are they doing? Do the buffaloes really do much about that? No, they're just sort of sitting there chewing their cud, right? They don't do much of anything. So we're the same thing. It's like we're in the trap that the afflictions have laid for us. We're in that pen. We're seeing everyone going off, and what are we doing? We're doing the human equivalent of chewing our cud. So we have to use this precious human life now while we've had. And if we don't use it well, then what will come to us? What will become of us at the time of death? Now we also have to remember that death is inescapable. As it says in the next stanza, it says, "When all around the ways are blocked and the Lord of Death is watching you, how is it you can enjoy your food? How can you like so much to sleep?" So we are, so wherever we want to go, any direction we go leads to death. We need to understand this. There are many roads we can take in life. We might hope that we'll have one that'll be an escape, but there isn't. There's no way. Like there are lots of billionaires who are trying to figure out how we can colonize other planets or upload the contents of our brains to a computer or research ways to prevent aging. But the best you can do is buy yourself a little bit of extra time. Eventually, you'll still have to die. And if you use whatever time you have to just enjoy the pleasures of being a billionaire, if you're rich, or just to enjoy the pleasures of this lifetime, you'll have nothing when you die. So instead, we need to use our time well to prepare for the time of death. As Shantideva says, oops, one too far. You will die soon, so until then gather the accumulations, for then when there is no more time to give up sloth, what will you do? So we haven't got a lot of time, but there is something we can do. We can gather the accumulations of merit and wisdom. So what that means is we can train ourselves in virtue, in positive thoughts and positive actions. And if we train ourselves to be more generous, more ethical, more patient with others, if we train our minds to see the nature of things more clearly, this will definitely help us at the time of death. The only thing that is going to go with us at the time of death is our mind. Everything else gets left behind. So now, as humans, we have this really important and great opportunity to train our minds. If we were a dog or an insect or even worse, we wouldn't be able to do it. If instead we think, well, I'm a human now, I'm going to be human in my next life and I'll take my chances, then actually our chances are not good. The numbers aren't good. You have to make the most of this opportunity now while you have it, because you don't know how long you will. If we wait till later, it may be too late. When the Gyalwang Karmapa teaches about impermanence, he often says that the point of meditating on impermanence is not just to scare ourselves. So you might think to yourself, well, all this talk about impermanence is really scary. What am I going to do at the time of death? And you might feel scared about it, and that's natural. But the important point actually is that merely being afraid of death does not help. We can see this because, even ants and insects are afraid of dying. Even earthworms are afraid of dying. They don't have much brain. They've just got these tiny dorsal ganglia. There's nothing, it's not like humans, but they're still afraid. And that doesn't do them any good. So instead, what we have to do is we have to appreciate how rare and precious this opportunity is. Death itself may not be very as terrifying as we think it will be, but what is terrifying is the thought of what might come next if we don't use our time now. So to appreciate the meditation on impermanence, you first have to appreciate the precious human life and its incredible rarity, this great opportunity that we have. If we don't practice the Dharma right now, we'll have less of a chance of becoming human in our next life, and much less a human with all the leisures and resources that allow us to practice the Dharma. The chance of that is like, if you were to think, I'm going to win the megabucks lottery, the chances of that are greater than the chance of you becoming a human being in your next lifetime, if you look at the numbers. In fact, your chances of winning the megabucks lottery 10 times in a row are higher than your chances of becoming a human in your next lifetime, even if you don't buy a ticket a single time. So you got to be really careful. You've got to do with what you have. The chances of us being human in our next lifetime are like 1 in several billion, much less a human with the precious human leisures and resources. The Lord of but the Lord of Death is going to come for us and is not going to wait for us to finish. And so we're going to go there sooner than we think. We can't plan for many years and put off what is most important to later, because we just don't know how long we have. So as Shantideva says in the next stanza, this is undone, this just begun, and this remains but halfway done. The Lord of Death will suddenly come, and you will think, alas, I'm finished. So we might think I've got a lot of time, I can take my time about doing the things that are important. But we don't know what's going to happen when the Lord of Death comes. Is the Lord of Death going to come before you've even started what you want to do, before you've started your Dharma practice? Is it only, will you have just begun and the Lord of Death comes? Or will you be halfway through? You don't know. And at that point, if you haven't used your time well, you won't have anything to do. So it's important to use our time now. So we have to be diligent. We've entered the gate of the Dharma, and we need to practice. If we do, our practice will improve and we'll see the results. There's no need to panic, but we need to recognize that it is an urgent situation. So it is. So Shantideva then speaks about this again in the next two stanzas, where he says, "You'll watch your relatives lose all hope as tears from the shock of grief roll down their faces, their eyes red and swollen. You'll see the faces of Yama's henchmen. Recalling your misdeeds with anguish and hearing the din of hell, the dread will make you foul yourself with filth. You'll be in torment. What will you do?" So these two stanzas are similar to what Shantideva said in the second chapter. Nothing else is going to help at the moment of death. I think I put this stanza in here. Nope, I didn't. Sorry. I intended to put the stanza in the presentation, but I forgot. When the second chapter, Shantideva says, when seized by Yama's messengers, what good are friends, what good are kin? Merit alone will guard me then, but I, alas, haven't practiced that. So what is going to help us at the time of death is Dharma practice. And that means that that our minds need to be peaceful, loving, compassionate, and filled with bodhicitta. If we can die in that state of a mind, then we'll have a much better chance of going on to a good destination. So we need to train our mind in beneficial, loving, and compassionate ways of thinking now while we still can. Otherwise, who knows what sort of an experience we're going to have at the time of death. There is a lot of talk about near-death experiences, and you can read about them. And mostly they talk about the good experiences that people have. People report seeing lights or having vivid experience and feeling all-encompassing love and so forth. But actually, there are also people who have bad experiences, bad near-death experience. There are fewer of them. So there's no experience and no certainty what sort of experience you're going to have at the time of death. Will you see a beautiful, pure realm, or will you hear the din of hell? It's up to you right now. So basically, these these verses from 4 to 10 have what do we say? They've explained the contemplations of death and impermanence as a method to counter the laziness of sloth. It's not a popular meditation, not a lot of fun, and it can be depressing or scary. But if you do it, and you have to keep with it, and if you keep with it long enough, actually, there's a kind of liberation that comes from it. If you go for it, it really actually is very freeing in a way. So you have to try it. You have to keep with it, even if it's really difficult at first. It frees you from a lot of concern because it makes you want to focus on what's really important now. So the point of meditating on death and impermanence isn't to just reduce yourself to a quivering lump of jelly. You have to remember that you have an incredible opportunity, that you can overcome the fear of death for yourself and then help other people overcome that same fear. It's like the song from Milarepa that Trungpa Rinpoche often quotes, "I went to the mountains from fear of death and seized the citadel of deathlessness." So, you want to avoid things that are hard and unpleasant. We all want to have pleasant Dharma practice. The rest of our life is miserable enough. We don't want to make ourselves miserable doing our Dharma practice, but actually, you have to look at these things. You have to work with them, and if you do so, it'll bring great benefit. There's no pain, no gain, they say. Anyways, in terms of actually how to meditate on the death and impermanence, there's not a lot of time right now. I've gone on for quite a while. So I think you can find lamas or in your area, you can speak about it, you can read texts such as The Torch of True Meaning or the words of my Torch of True Meaning by Jamgon Khenpo Rinpoche, or Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche, or many other texts that teach about how to meditate on impermanence. And if you get stuck, you should feel free to contact us here at Trungpa Monastery, Canada. We're all willing to help. You can send an email or something, contact us and let us know if you have questions or anything. If you want to know, how do I meditate on impermanence, we're happy to help. I'm happy to help. If you send a message to the office, you all have the office email, then they'll forward it to me and I'll try to get back to you. So you should feel happy to or willing to contact if you have any questions. So that is enough for this morning. I'd like to thank you all for listening now, and we will close by reciting the dedication of merit. So please think to yourself, may that by the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma today, may we be able to May the masters who uphold the teachings live long. May we be able to develop qualities so that we are able to truly serve the masters and the teachings. And may we be able to bring all sentient beings to the state of Buddhahood to free them from the sufferings of samsara. And so thinking in this way, please, please help recite this dedication of merit. Osanam de tam je se bani tomne ne beranam pam chete Gegana chi balong chobai sipe tole ro kunyo ro sho. Okay, so thank you very much, and we will see you all again in 2 hours, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Thank you.